In Lingua Podcast live from Dessau is broadcast from Middle Deutschland and features all things languages. The show is hosted by our teachers, presenting students and guests from all walks of language learning experiences. Joining us this week on our podcast is a very special guest. His name is Conrad Feininger. He's here to share a little bit about his family's history and how he is connected to Dessau. Conrad, who was your grandfather?
My grandfather was Lyonel Feininger. He was one of the first instructors hired by the Bauhaus in Weimar by Walter Gropius, and was a resident of Dessau from 1926 to 1933.
Can you tell us a little bit about his life before he came to Germany?
Yeah, he grew up in New York with sort of foster parents because his parents were professional musicians who spent almost all their time in Europe. So he was running around Manhattan with his friends, playing on the docks and spending his summers in Plainfield, New Jersey.
Were his parents playing with like symphonies or orchestras?
His father was a concert soloist on violin. Okay. I don't think he played for orchestras. I think he played concerts on his own. Okay. And the mother was an opera singer. But she was a sickly person and was left behind by her husband. So her career didn't go as far as her Lionel's father's did.
Okay. So at the time when he was getting ready to come to Germany, his parents were already in Europe.
Most of the time, yeah, almost all of the time. He went to rejoin them, and in those days you were told what you were going to be, and he was going into the family business of being a violinist.
Okay.
And he played the violin his whole life.
So he had already started to study the violin.
Yes, but he was also drawing in secret too.
Okay.
And when he got here, the lack of supervision allowed him to make his own choices. So he chose to go to art school instead of to violin school, and that caused a lot of trouble.
So yesterday when we talked about, just briefly, when we were talking about this podcast today, here's a 16-year-old that goes down to the ports of New York City, mm-hmm. gets on a sailboat.
Probably a combination sail and steam. I've never known. They were starting to motorize their vessels already after the Civil War.
And does he arrive in Hamburg?
I think so.
Okay.
But I can't swear to that.
Okay. I mean, based on the little bit of research that I did before our podcast, he does attend school in Hamburg at some time of his life. Okay.
Yes. And I believe this is also where the first art school was.
Okay.
And it's a complicated story because I think his first art teacher was the father of his first wife, Clara Fürst. It was not a successful marriage, and there were 2 children from it. But he was drawn into a world through personal connection as well as professional.
Okay, so he married the daughter of his first art teacher.
This is my understanding, yes.
Okay.
But not successfully.
And you said there were 2 children from that marriage?
2 girls.
2 girls. So you have 2 stepsisters?
They're step-aunts. They would have been.
Oh, what am I talking about? Stepsisters. I'm already confusing the chain here.
Yeah, it is difficult.
Okay.
They were, through my youth, behind the Iron Curtain. They were
mm-hmm.
in the East. And the first wife was killed by the Nazis.
Okay.
She was Jewish.
So this would be your great...
step-grandmother.
Step-grandmother.
Yeah, I don't think I really can claim a relationship since the marriage ended before I was
born.
Or my father
either. Was born. Okay, yeah, that's right.
All to the second wife, who was also a German Jew.
How old was he when he married for the first time?
I think young, maybe 22, 23.
So he had been in the country like almost 7 years.
Yeah, this early history is, I would hate to present myself as an authority.
Okay.
I really can't. He achieved early success as a political cartoonist.
Okay.
And that morphed into becoming a cartoonist for the Chicago Tribune, where he made the Kinder Kids, one of the first color strips in the United States. That was put out of business by the war.
Okay.
They would have had to move back to the U.S. to continue, and they stayed in Germany, and you couldn't go back and forth.
Was he working for a newspaper publication here in Germany?
Sure.
Okay.
Also in Paris.
As a cartoonist?
Yes, as a cartoonist,
Okay.
Political cartoonist.
A political cartoonist, sort of like with satire?
Yeah. I went to an exhibit this summer of his political cartoons. Some are making fun of the construction of the longest canal in Germany.
Okay.
That kind of issue. The main point to that is that he had a real successful thing going on, and at 33, he turned it upside down to become a fine painter.
Okay.
Mainly at his second wife's insistence. She was an art student. She was married too, to a dentist, I think. But she encouraged him, and he gave up what he had been doing. And I think the First World War helped with that too.
Okay.
He was an enemy alien, had to talk to the post office every day.
Okay. As a U.S. citizen living in Germany.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So from okay, so I want to get the timeline right. So he studies in various art schools in Germany.
Yes.
Okay. Then he becomes a political cartoonist.
Yeah.
Now at this time, can we talk a little bit about his relationship with his father?
Yeah, it was virtually non-existent. They wrote letters, but from, say, the turn of the 20th century until his death in 22, they never saw each other again.
And this was just because he chose to go a different path?
Yeah.
Not into music, but into art.
But there's something else there, and my family were very close-mouthed.
Okay.
Something about a watch being pawned, and I don't know the details. Nobody ever would talk about it, but there was a huge blow-up.
Okay.
And Feiningers hold a grudge pretty good.
So there's speculation that your grandfather pawned one of his watches.
To help a friend, and this upset the father very much. But again, I don't know the details.
Okay. So when do you think he had last contact? Because he comes to Germany. They must have met a few times. Maybe?
Not that I know of.
Okay. So did this rift begin in the States before he came to Germany?
No, I think it began over here.
Okay, so they at least saw each other.
But I think that they hardly saw each other in New York.
Okay. Because they were
he speaks
traveling.
much more of other people raising him.
Okay. Like when he was growing up before he got on that boat, who was taking care of him?
Various people. There was a farm family in New Jersey that he spent a lot of time with.
Okay.
And it's possible that some relative of his mother's was involved, but this has never been explained to me, and almost all the biographical writing is in German.
Okay.
So I know very little, and with my father's passing, I know less.
Okay. All right, so from a political cartoonist, he meets his wife.
The second wife. He's on a sketching trip in the Baltic outside of Rostock. And she is also on vacation up there, and it's sort of instant attraction.
How old is he at this point?
1903, 1871, 81, 91, 01, 31, 32 or 30.
Okay,
yeah.
31 or 32.
Yeah.
All right, so he falls in love for the second time.
Or for the first time.
Or for the first time.
This I've never been able to forgive him. One child in an unsuccessful relationship, okay. Two is a little strange. But apparently they were not happy from the very beginning. I think, it might be the equivalent of a shotgun wedding, that she was pregnant and they had to.
Were the girls born quickly, like both of them?
Yeah. The offensive term in the U.S. is Irish twins.
Okay.
So yes, there was, say, a year and a half between them.
Okay.
It was pretty quick.
Do you know if he ever had did he keep contact with his two daughters?
Well, yeah, he did. After my father died, we had to settle his affairs, and part of that was settling Lyonel's library, which my father inherited. Mm-hmm. And we kept finding little watercolors. They're called ghosties. They're a late thing he did. And apparently he would make these to send to the daughters in the east of Germany so they could sell.
Okay.
But he had to hide them from Julia, who didn't want him giving stuff away.
Okay.
There was also money we found in there, too, in these books. So he was secretly supporting them. The last year he went to the Baltic before the Nazis shut that down was, I think, 1933. It was already too hard for Julia to be there with flags all over the place.
Okay.
But there are pictures of him entertaining his older daughter with her 3 children.
Okay.
And there are pictures of all 5 kids together. My father and his 2 brothers, along with these 2 girls.
Okay.
And in the care of Julia's father. So there was some progressive thinking going on, and they were accepted within the family. But I've heard that the latest biography of Lyonel, which came out this year, I'm embarrassed, I don't remember the author's name.
It's okay.
Attacks him for having left these people behind.
Interesting.
The first wife, Clara, survived the war, apparently, but turned herself in as a Jew near the end and was killed at Auschwitz.
Do you know what year that was?
It would be early 45.
Okay.
As things were shutting down. She almost made it.
She turned herself in?
This is the story I've been told.
Wow.
Looking for better treatment, or I don't know.
Okay.
But the 2 daughters survived, and when the big lawsuit happened, they helped testify, and there's a picture of my father with his half-sister in Munich, I think, in 1974. They're gone.
They're both dead, right?
Oh, yeah. They were older than my father, and he made it to 101.
Okay. Interesting. So your grandfather's second wife is the one who sort of steered him into art.
Julia Berg, yeah.
Okay.
Or into fine art.
Okay.
They had an immediate affinity. He tried to encourage her as an artist. She gave it up to manage his career, to make the great man. But his first contact with Weimar was following her to art school there before the Bauhaus.
Okay.
Which is one of the reasons that he agreed to be part of the Bauhaus, is that Weimar had a very romantic association for the 2 of them.
So she studied there. He followed her.
Yes, and visited or did his own thing there.
So this is before, so 1919 he goes with Gropius, but this is before 1919, right?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
The period from, say, 1910-12 to 1919, he was establishing himself within the problems of the war and so on, but he was he was the most famous hire and the first hire by Gropius.
So how is he earning a living at that time as an artist? Is he selling his works?
Yes, they were beginning to sell. He was, as we've said, a successful cartoonist.
Right.
And they got a lot of support from Julia's father,
Okay.
who was, I think, a coffee broker
Okay.
in Berlin, a successful, prosperous businessman.
Okay.
And I know they got support from that. He was a very progressive man. You can see it in the photos.
So do you know the year they got married?
That's a little fuzzy. I believe it was 1907 in London. Maybe shortly after Andreas I was born. Although that would make it 1908 because his birthday was in December.
Okay.
I know they had to marry in London because of divorce policies.
Okay.
And they were also in Paris. He drew for Le Témoin, illustrated newspaper, and was becoming a cubist there, part of the art movement in Paris at that time. And then they went to Berlin, to Zehlendorf, and were there until they went to Weimar.
And this is your father is born in Berlin?
Yes, 1910.
Okay.
And I think the middle one, Lawrence, was also born in Berlin.
Okay. How many brothers and sisters did your father have?
He had 2 brothers and 2 half-sisters.
Okay. So just 2 boys from his second marriage?
Yeah, there were 3 boys altogether.
Okay.
Just as I am one of 3 boys. The family is so closed-mouthed about things they don't want to talk about that for years I thought it was just the Feininger way, that there were nothing but boys. Andreas had 1 child, a boy. Lawrence was a priest, so he had no children.
Right.
And I didn't realize that there were these 2 girls until later.
Interesting.
But then I didn't know that my father had been married a first time until I was in my 20s.
Okay.
And when I asked, he said, because it was none of your business. And he's right. But it would have been interesting to know why my father was 40 when everyone else's father was 25.
Yeah, it's okay to ask questions.
It was a different world.
It was a different world. So let's talk about his art. How many different types of mediums did he work with?
He worked primarily with oil on canvas or with watercolor on paper.
Okay.
But he also made woodcuts, lithographs, sculptures, toys, model boats, and was a skilled photographer.
Okay.
Which my grandmother tried to hide. She didn't think much of photography.
Okay.
But you can see it on the street right now. Here in Dessau.
So here in Dessau this week at the Bauhaus Museum?
Until the 14th of November.
They are celebrating which particular type of craft are they celebrating? All of it?
Photography.
Photography.
Yeah. And outside of that, his daytime photos of Dessau, a chance to see Dessau almost 100 years ago.
Now, are they normally kept in the Bauhaus Museum? Is there a permanent collection?
No. These all came out of the archive at Harvard.
Okay.
It is a Bauhaus person who is doing this. She's also writing a book. Christine Ergang, who is part of the Master House wing of the Bauhaus.
Okay.
The Bauhaus has materials of Lyonel's, but these came from Harvard.
Okay. How does Gropius find out about your grandfather?
There were major shows, art shows, and he had his ear to the ground, and it was a smaller world.
Okay, because in this period, like if he's in Berlin in 1910, like only 9 years after that, he's traveling with Gropius going to Weimar.
Yeah.
So in those 9 years, he's established himself as a great artist in Europe.
Yes, I think that's fair to say.
Okay.
He was very popular.
So Gropius sees his work. Do you know when the first time they meet is?
No.
Do you think that was in Dessau?
I think it was in Berlin.
I think it was in Berlin, okay.
Dessau only comes up when the progressive mayor of Dessau in 1925 finds the money to build the new home. Okay. They were, it was the Weimar Republic. Mm-hmm. Things were getting pretty dicey there.
Okay. So let's talk about that. Okay, so Gropius hires your grandfather?
Yeah.
Okay. As a teacher?
As a teacher. Everybody at the Bauhaus taught perhaps outside of their primary field of expertise. Mm-hmm. The theory, as I understand it, of the Bauhaus is to live for the art, not for the art to live for you.
Okay.
So the point was to be doing and not only studying in theory.
Okay. So it's a philosophy. It's a way
yes,
of life.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
It's not just a hardware store.
Right. As I pointed out yesterday.
That confused me very much when I first came here.
Plattenbau.
Yeah.
So they go together to Weimar. The campus is established. Does the school open in 1919 in Weimar?
I believe so.
Okay.
It had been a more formal old school academy that was changed into the Bauhaus.
So what kinds of courses are they teaching on the curriculum in 1919?
They're teaching weaving, printmaking, woodworking, furniture building, and fine art as well.
Okay. So your grandfather is teaching?
In Weimar, he was, yeah.
What course is he teaching?
He was in charge of the printmaking workshop.
Okay. So artists would have their drawings, and then they would be printed.
Yes, and they were experimenting with printing techniques.
Like duplication.
Yeah. Okay. Inventing typefaces, all kinds of things.
Interesting ideas, right?
Yeah.
When it comes to...
Yeah, and the technology was changing.
And he's still working on his art.
Oh, yeah. Painting away. I don't know how they found the hours in the day to do the things that they did. Okay. This has been a mystery to me. He took pictures the way we do now, snap, 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 hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pictures, and printed them too. And I had an old school darkroom when I was young. Mm-hmm. It takes a minimum of 9 minutes to produce a photograph just from the chemical here, chemical here, chemical here. And there are hundreds of them. Okay.
Did they have that darkroom on campus?
I don't know that he was doing it in Weimar. In Dessau, they had a darkroom in the basement of the Master House.
Okay.
And I just learned the other week that they kept the light out of the darkroom in the basement with one of his paintings.
It's classic. So what was his wife... Was she also teaching? Was she studying in Weimar? Like, what was she doing there?
I think that she actually studied in the ceramics workshop. I don't swear to that.
Okay.
She made some of her own art. Mm-hmm. I find it racist. She made collages, little cutout pieces of paper to make portraits of like dancers and exotic people.
Okay.
But black people with big lips and not so nice.
Okay.
I don't think anyone cared back then. But more and more and more, she became his manager and his agent. She negotiated with galleries. She handled sales. She was a business person. But the other thing to remember is that they were almost never together. Andreas, the older brother, was in poor health sometimes, as was she. They used to go to spas in the Black Forest.
Okay.
She spent long bits of time with her father in Berlin. And this was from almost the very beginning. We know so much about them because they wrote letters all the time.
Okay.
And there were 3 mail deliveries a day in this country back in the day. So you could
mail
write
came
in the
3
morning
times.
and get an answer in the evening when the last mail was delivered. It really is remarkable. And they had telegrams, too.
So this is when Toy Japan operated on time.
Yeah. Yeah. Pretty miraculous. I've had your letter this morning. And
three mail deliveries in one day.
Yep. Every day.
Astonishing.
Yeah. But it makes me wonder about their relationship because they were apart so much.
Okay.
He would go to Dieppe on the Baltic, which is now in Poland with a different name, and I don't know the name. But he would go in April and stay till October. And she would come for like 2 weeks in July, like a normal person.
Okay.
But he had a pretty rigid schedule. He would work on watercolors up there, and then in the winter he would turn them into paintings.
Okay.
It was like a creative factory.
And did he have a warehouse where he would keep all of his artwork?
I don't know in Weimar. They lived in an apartment. But in Dessau, the Master House studios have pretty big storage spaces.
Okay.
And I'm sure it was there in the house.
So what is your father doing in Weimar? Is he a student in an elementary school?
No, that was in Weimar. It was that he and Lawrence were sent to a boarding school during the transition to Dessau. But he had a terrible hay fever, allergies or whatever, and had to leave school. And so he was kicking around the house with nothing to do.
Okay.
And that's how they got into the model boats. And these are not just your average model boats.
Okay.
These are fully functioning miniature sailboats that they would sail on the Baltic in the summertime and in yacht ponds during the year. It was a popular sport.
So he would take a block of wood and just start whittling away.
Yeah, or building a model. In Quedlinburg, they have like this 3-story galleon, fully functional.
Okay, you mentioned Quedlinburg. Like, my student also mentioned that city, which is not that far from here. No. What is your father's relationship with?
This is where it gets a little ugly, and I have to be careful.
Okay.
There was a student at the Bauhaus named Hermann Klump, and he became a close friend of the Feininger family. The director of the Moritzberg was Alois Schardt, I believe is the right way. When they had to flee, they left a massive amount of material here, more than 50 paintings, full-size paintings.
This would have been in 1937.
Yes.
Okay.
More than 2,000 works on paper. And we come to find out most of my father's early works, too. So it's another 175 pieces. They were left in the care of Klump, who was from Quedlinburg.
Okay.
And Quedlinburg ended up as part of the East, of course. Until 1965 or 67, nobody seemed to care about these materials. Lyonel died in 55, but he died working, making new things.
Mm-hmm.
And Julia never pursued it. Eventually they did, and they won a lawsuit, and the East German government declared the works to be national art treasures, so they couldn't leave the country.
So they were all still there in Quedlinburg?
Yes, and other parts of East Germany.
Okay.
There was a second lawsuit in the 80s, and the family was one of the only private families to successfully sue a government. They won the case, and a lot of the materials came even before the fall of the wall. But thousands of pieces still remained. In another 10 years, those were finally surrendered. And 15 years after that, the year my father died, in 2010, it turns out that they had almost 200 pieces of his art that my parents had saved. So there was this...
The same name.
Yeah, clump. And the final deal that got worked out is what allowed the Feininger Gallery in Quedlinburg to exist.
Was he sitting on it? Was he selling it?
He wasn't selling it. He was sitting on it. He believed, I think until his dying day, that Lionel had given this stuff to him.
Was it properly maintained? Was it properly stored?
I believe so, to a certain extent. But, they say they overlooked my father's stuff. I've seen the cabinet it came out of. It's in Quedlinburg in the lobby of the gallery. It takes 4 men to lift empty away from the wall. How you don't know this is in your house for 60 years is interesting to me.
4 men to lift the empty cabinet.
Yeah, I wanted to see the labels on the back to see where it was made and what was what.
So there was an agreement that was made between your grandfather and this man.
Well,
supposedly.
Yeah, I mean, it was all done in haste and maybe moved in a horse-drawn cart under a blanket. It was dangerous times.
In the darkness of night.
He had been labeled a degenerate artist, and they were destroying work when they found it. But they were very close. I've seen a photo of my father's room in the Bauhaus, in the Master House, and all he would say is that this is after Klump took my room, and he lived in the house with them. I've always thought there was maybe something a little more personal.
And the only fact that everything still there? Like all the pieces that were left to him in 1937?
I don't know how careful an inventory there was. As I say, the works on paper are still bleeding out of Quedlinburg now.
So some are missing?
Don't know. I think the major pieces were all intact, but I don't... They were not careful people, and operated on trust and operated under, they didn't flee in the night. One of the biggest pieces of furniture I have they brought with me is a chest taller than me. So fleeing was different than
to America,
like from Bosnia or whatever. But they left in a hurry and left things behind.
Did they think that the art would get confiscated by the authorities on the way out?
I can only speculate, but I think they were also limited in what they could actually take. The Nazis made some pretty strict rules, and they were like penniless when they got to New York. So I think they weren't thinking about this stuff, and I don't think they thought about it until 10 years after Lionel's death, and I think it was probably the family lawyer who was lawyer to most of the major artists of the mid-20th century, a guy named Colin.
So your grandfather was not lumped into a group of artists that their work was either stolen?
Well, he was one of the degenerate artists. I forget how.
So that is a name. He was a degenerate artist.
The Degenerate Art exhibit set the standard, and there are pictures of Hitler making fun of these things. They were hung in the museum, sort of slanted and with nasty frames, and made to look primitive, like Picasso's African stuff. All of this was part of the campaign to destroy the thinking of the time.
Okay. Your grandfather comes back to Dessau in 1925.
Or it comes for the first time.
Comes for the first time.
Yeah.
Because of the Weimar campus is...
It's closing, it's coming, and Gropius offered him a deal he couldn't refuse.
Okay.
Rent-free housing in a brand new house, and you don't have to teach. You don't have to do anything.
Okay.
Just be Feininger on campus. Be Feininger here.
So in that name, the Feininger name is bolstering.
He's a famous man.
All over the world.
Primarily Germany at
Okay.
this time.
Okay.
But famous enough that the mayor of Halle wants the Halle pictures. And originally that was supposed to be one. But Lyonel was so enchanted by Halle that he did, I think it's 9.
They're right here. So the mayor of Halle invites him to Halle.
Yeah.
Is it under a like a contract? He contracts him? Okay.
It was a contract.
Okay.
Yeah, he had his housing there, and he had a studio in the round tower of the Moritzberg Museum.
Okay.
And I put in a plug. The new director is not doing right by Feininger. When they renovated the museum, they made the Feininger corner where you can look out the windows and see the things he painted. But the Moritzberg Museum is as beautiful a place as you're ever going to see, and the best melding of modern architecture with whatever that period is.
Right.
Sort of Norman era, the 900s. They've laid this steel structure on top of an old stone fort-looking place. It's beautiful.
Okay, I've seen that. When I went to get my first vaccination shot, I walked by that building and I didn't know what it was.
Yeah, it's worth going inside, even though it's right now they're not showing the respect to these paintings that they should.
Okay.
They've loaned them out. A lot of them are in Quedlinburg, which is also worth visiting.
Okay.
You know, a medieval town where the streets were too narrow for tanks to ruin it. It's like walking in the Middle Ages.
The only thing I know about Quedlinburg is that the Christmas markets are unbelievable, and
Yes.
I haven't visited it yet.
Yeah.
But now I will.
I've been there like 3 times.
Okay.
It's really special.
So Weimar is becoming too dangerous or difficult to live in?
Difficult, and maintaining the support that the institution needs was difficult.
Okay. What can I ask? I don't know if you know this, but who are the students in Weimar in 1919, 1920?
They run the gamut. In the early days, what nobody knows and is figuring out now is that there were much more women than men.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the men have been killed in the war, but there were more women than men. It was progressive in that way, although they weren't very respectful to the women. Mm-hmm. There were a combination of brutally poor people and children of, lumber barons or whatever. Mm-hmm. My father's best friend was really poor, died of TB after trying to live in a stable, a horse stable, and it was too humid and too cold and too nasty, and it killed him. But then there were people like my father who were 16 years old, walking around in suits and ties and living the life.
Yeah. How is it that Dessau establishes a part of that campus?
The whole campus.
Okay, so the whole Weimar campus is closed.
You'd have to it was threatened with closure and then closed because they went to a new home.
So really, it was only open for 6 years
in Weimar.
Uh-huh.
But its golden age was here from 26 to 33. Okay. These custom-made buildings designed to Gropius' specifications, Same with residences for the masters.
So does Gropius know that the end is coming in Weimar? When does he start getting contractors and subcontractors to build the Bauhaus and the Meister houses in Dessau? Does he foresee
in 1924 or 25, the mayor of Dessau offers to build this for them. And he then designs it and accepts this offer and comes here. The mayor is the real hero.
Do you know his name?
I'm not a historian, but it's been on some of these kiosks on the corner. He was a real progressive man. And the fact that he got it done in spite of all these political stuffs that are bubbling and boiling, it was very lucky.
Okay. So your grandfather comes back to Dessau in 1926.
And again, for the first time to Dessau.
And your father comes with him.
Yes, he leaves boarding. He's in boarding school in Hellerau, and the hay fever takes over, and he comes home. There were bedrooms built for the three boys in this house, but they weren't in full-time residence. Lawrence went from Hellerau to Heidelberg. Andreas, he studied furniture making in Zerbst for a while, and then fell in love with a Bauhaus student, and that's a short version. Was already interested in photography and published his first book of pictures from Sweden, and then emigrated, earliest of all of them, to the U.S., where he became one of the foremost photographers for Life magazine.
Jesus.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like I'm talking to, like, royalty.
No, but there is a strong creative bent in this family, and the family business is art, where others would be in law or medicine.
Okay.
Andreas was arguably for a while the most famous of them all. You would recognize some of his photos for Life magazine.
Okay.
They are iconic in the extreme.
Amazing.
I understand that he would occasionally invite special students to his studio, and that he would look at students' work. But I think he valued his freedom.
So Gropius just wanted to give him their relationship is, we haven't talked about their relationship. What was their relationship like? I
think it was positive. I understand that Gropius was maybe a difficult person, where my grandfather was a shy, retiring person. But Gropius was always in some affair or other.
But he recognized your grandfather's talent, and he gave him the space and he gave him the freedom to explore it.
I mean, they are linked together for all time. The Bauhaus Manifesto is a Lyonel Feininger woodcut on the cover. What I know is that it was a coming out for both of them, that Lyonel was only beginning his work with woodcuts, and that some of that came out of material shortages after the First World War, that there were many drafts of this before it came to what it was, but it is essentially a cathedral of light, and a cathedral is the original Bau building, and the light is the freedom of knowledge and
but the manifesto particularly displays your grandfather's work, like 12 pieces of his work.
Yes. I'm really only familiar with the cover.
Okay.
And because it's in German, I've never read it.
It's the woodcut piece, right?
Yeah, the woodcut of the cathedral.
Yeah. I mean, it's so intricate.
Yeah.
I mean, the details.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing. But in Dessau, it's hard to imagine them in that house that is so modern. And he was a modern artist, but he was also, I mean, he was composing music, and what he chose to compose were fugues, old Bach, organy kind of things.
Mm-hmm. Who influenced his art? I mean, did your father ever talk about that?
Again, not an art historian.
Okay.
I'm sure Picasso helped. He admired Chagall. I think Georges Braque, but I'm not a historian. He also, I think, saw himself as a pioneer.
So, on and off, he lives in Dessau until they leave the country.
No, there were 2 or 3 years back in Berlin.
Okay.
Before they left. They left late, like 37.
Mm-hmm.
And after some really threatening stuff. Nazi fans of his art tried to warn him twice, even before he left Dessau, that it wasn't safe.
When did he leave Dessau?
I think they
early
left
30s?
when the school folded in 33 or 34.
Okay. So his friends here are urging him to leave.
Well, Nazi contacts are. I don't know. Schlemmer died in the war. I guess Kandinsky went to Switzerland. He did not follow the Bauhaus to Chicago.
What year does Gropius leave? Does he leave after him?
I think they all left at once.
Okay.
I think maybe they lost the leases on the houses, which none of them owned. The city owned them.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know that.
But are they leaving direct? Like you said, a couple of years they lived in Berlin. Was that after 1933? 1933, everything closes.
From 33 to like 37.
Okay.
I think they were in Berlin in an apartment.
Okay. How do they get home?
On a ship from Hamburg,
Mm-hmm.
as people now take a plane. As I say, they fled with a massive amount of furniture,
Mm-hmm.
so it wasn't fleeing like we know it.
Like, I wonder why take the furniture and not the art?
Well, they did take art, but there was so much art
Uh-huh.
that it couldn't be done, or it would have drawn attention to itself. I don't know how that goes.
Okay.
But
how many there's more than 2,000 different pieces that are left in Germany?
It works on paper, yeah.
Okay.
Major paintings, I don't have an accurate count, but say more than 50 and less than 100. But still, I mean, these are not small paintings.
Right.
Um,
Woodworking, carvings.
I've never seen come out of there. Some ship models, maybe.
Okay.
But I think he did a lot of the carving after he got to New York. Doesn't take up so much space
Mm-hmm.
to make these little, what's called the city at the edge of the world.
Okay.
Little figures and houses.
So who gets on the boat? Your grandfather?
Julia and he. Lux left in 36 and was already in New York.
Your father left a year earlier.
Yeah.
Okay.
He had early success selling paintings, but it just got too hard, and he saw how dangerous things were.
Mm-hmm. How old is he when he leaves?
He's 1936. He's 26, and Andreas had already gone to New York. They
Uh-huh.
had a kid by then, and he was established in New York.
Okay.
But they were all pretty poor at first.
When your grandfather reaches New York, how old is he?
37. He's like 65. 1871. So bad with math. 81, 91,
That's okay.
01, 11, 21, 31. So yeah, he was 65. And had to really start over again. You know, he he worked all his time in Germany to be seen as a German, and he was always identified as an American. I don't know how you do that, but it happens to me too on the street. Somehow Americans look different. I don't know. But then when he gets to New York, he's seen as this German artist.
He's already okay, so he's super famous in Europe, in Germany, in Europe, let's say.
Yeah.
Right.
And selected collectors, intelligent people who have spent time in Europe are also
know his work.
Yeah.
So he gets to New York. Does he open a gallery as soon as he lands?
He continues a relationship with a gallery dealer that he had been involved with before. But it's tough going at first. He has a retrospective show at the Museum of Modern Art.
What year is that?
41, 42.
I mean, that's a big deal.
Yeah, sure. And the thing that really made him was a competition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art for war bond sales, where he takes second prize and gets a bunch of money.
Okay.
And that's in the book my father wrote with Andreas, City at the Edge of the World.
Okay.
He talks about how proud and pleased he feels and how the people wander around looking for the stickers of who won what, and eventually maybe they look at the picture.
Yeah. Where does he live in New York?
Outside of Greenwich Village in the West 20s. The whole family sort of settled there.
It's a great location.
Yeah, right by the elevated railroad. And he was there for the rest of his life.
I mean, today that's known as the artistic part of town, so he's in the right part of town.
Yeah, and in an apartment that I think was I was there only as a 7-year-old boy. I have no memory of it. But it seems like it was made for artists, that there was a big place with good windows and good light where he could paint.
Okay.
And again, sophisticated fans helped at the right moment.
So in 1937, when is after the MoMA show, it stirs some interest. You know, his name is being passed around. He's living in Greenwich Village. He's working every day, painting. Yeah. How much is art selling for at that particular time? Is he doing it to support the family, for sales? Because you said he arrived.
I think he does it for sales.
Okay. So at that point, what?
I think what seems like nothing now was something then.
Of course.
So I would guess, maybe 4,000 to 6,000 per painting.
Okay.
Which in those days was
huge.
Good money. I know it was hard at first, but by the war years, they were spending summers in the country in Connecticut in rented houses.
Okay.
They can't have been doing that bad.
No.
And after he died, my grandmother would come to Cambridge for the summer and stay in a hotel. That doesn't come free.
Right.
So I think things became okay. And I know that we were the beneficiaries of it. I never went to public school.
Okay.
We didn't eat out or be frivolous people, but we had advantages that other kids don't get.
Thank you for listening to In Lingua Podcast, live from Dessau. We hope you stay tuned for more episodes.